The day of my dad's funeral, I walked out of my house in a black suit and tie, only to find a beige Lexus SUV parked across the middle of my driveway like it owned the place. My stomach dropped. I already knew who it belonged to. Helena Grimshaw, vice president of the Cedar Pines HOA, and the woman who had been making my life hell since I moved back into my childhood home 6 months ago to care for my dad. She was the kind of woman who carried a clipboard like it was a weapon and knew every line of the HOA bylaws better than her own grandkids' birthdays. I looked around, hoping maybe she was just dropping something off. No luck. Her car sat there like a dead weight, completely blocking my exit. I had a line of relatives inside, dressed in black, waiting to follow me to the cemetery. And now this. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, pulling out my phone to call a tow truck. That's when I heard her voice, sharp and nasal, cutting through the cool morning air like a dentist drill. "Quentin, I told you last week that guest parking isn't allowed on the street during weekday mornings. You've had visitors parked out here all week." I turned around and saw her standing on the edge of her lawn, hands on hips, hair helmeted in place, that smug little look on her face like she'd just caught a kid shoplifting gum. "That's not your driveway," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're blocking me in. We're on our way to my dad's funeral, Helena." "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," she said flatly, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry for anything. "But rules are rules. I sent out notices about weekday parking violations. Your guests have been parking incorrectly and disrupting the flow of the neighborhood." I blinked. "You're blocking my driveway. That's illegal." "It's HOA business," she said, brushing off my words like lint from her cardigan. "You've been non-compliant. Maybe this will finally get your attention." I stared at her, stunned. My jaw clenched. "You're seriously using my dad's funeral to make a point about street parking?" She didn't answer, just turned and walked back toward her porch like the matter was settled. I didn't care if it was illegal or not. I called the tow truck anyway. By the time it arrived, I'd already driven my car over the lawn to get out, tearing up part of my front yard just to make it to the funeral on time. My cousins helped direct traffic, and my aunt nearly slipped in the mud trying to follow behind me. I thought that would be the end of it. But when I got back home that evening, emotionally wrecked and just trying to breathe, there was a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. Cedar Pines HOA. Emergency lawn damage, fine $2,300. I stared at it for a long time. That's when I made a decision. Helena Grimshaw and the entire Cedar Pines HOA had just made a very expensive mistake. The next morning, I walked into the city records office with a folder under my arm and a migraine blooming behind my eyes. I hadn't slept. Grief wasn't something I could compartmentalize, but fury gave me focus. "Name?" the clerk asked without looking up. "Quentin Bell." "I need copies of Cedar Pines HOA's Articles of Incorporation, board meeting minutes for the last 12 months, and any enforcement action records filed against my address." She finally looked up. "You a reporter?" "Just a homeowner." "But I'm thinking about suing." The woman raised her eyebrows and slid a request form across the counter. "Sign here, and I'll get the files from the archive." While she disappeared into the back, I opened the manila folder I'd brought. Inside were photos of Helena's Lexus sitting across my driveway, time-stamped from the security camera mounted above the garage. I'd also printed out a copy of Chapter 6 of the Municipal Code, the section on illegal obstruction of private property. I highlighted everything relevant. The fine for blocking a driveway, $200 per hour. Helena had parked there for nearly 4. But that was just the beginning. When the clerk returned, I thumbed through the stack of documents. One thing stood out immediately. The HOA had failed to register their annual board election with the city. According to the bylaws, elections had to be publicly announced and certified with the municipal board. They hadn't done that in over 2 years. Which meant Helena Grimshaw wasn't the vice president of anything. She was an unelected volunteer pretending to have legal authority. I closed the file slowly, heartbeat steady. Back at home, I dug deeper. I combed through past newsletters, scanned old email notices, even checked the HOA's outdated website. Nowhere was there a record of a valid election. I called the city compliance officer and asked a few pointed questions. Her tone shifted fast when she heard what I'd uncovered. "That's a serious violation," she said. "If they're enforcing fines without a legal board, that could qualify as fraud." "Would that fall under civil or criminal? Depends how far it goes. If they've collected money under false authority." "You might want to talk to a lawyer." I already had someone in mind. Lydia Chow had been a classmate of mine in undergrad, now a hotshot civil attorney who'd made headlines last year for winning a homeowner's class action suit against a corrupt HOA in Santa Clarita. I sent her everything I'd gathered. 45 minutes later, she called. "Quentin, this is gold. The fake fine, the driveway obstruction, the unregistered board, this is a powder keg. Think it's worth pursuing? Absolutely. Especially if you're willing to go to court. But we're not just suing for the driveway stunt. We're going to hit them for fraudulent enforcement, emotional distress, and unlawful fines. And if we can prove intent, we'll add punitive damages." I'm in. Good. Start compiling a list of neighbors. I'll bet Helena's been pulling this on other people too. Turned out she had. I spent the next week knocking on doors, clipboard in hand, asking polite questions and listening carefully. Most people were hesitant at first, but once I explained what I'd discovered, the dam broke. An elderly couple across the street had been fined over $6,000 for installing a wheelchair ramp without aesthetic approval. A single mom 2 doors down had a lien placed on her home after disputing a trash bin violation. One retired vet told me Helena once threatened to report him for property neglect because he left his flag up overnight. Every story I heard, I wrote down. Every fine, every threat, every manipulation. I offered to connect them with Lydia directly. By the end of the week, we had 17 households signed on as co-plaintiffs. Lydia filed the suit on a Monday morning. Bell et al. vs. Cedar Pines Residential Association. We served Helena the papers during an open board meeting. She was sitting at the head of a folding table in the clubhouse, lecturing a teenager about basketball hoop placement when Lydia walked in with a court officer and dropped the envelope in front of her. The room went silent. "What is this?" she demanded. "A lawsuit," Lydia said evenly. "You'll find the list of charges inside. You'll also notice the court has issued a cease and desist on any further enforcement actions until the board's legal authority is verified." "This is ridiculous. I represent the HOA." "No, you don't," Lydia cut in. "Because there hasn't been an election in over 2 years. According to city code and your own bylaws, you're an illegitimate board member acting under color of authority. That's a crime." Helena's face drained of all color. For once, she didn't have a snappy retort. The clubhouse emptied by the hour's end. Word spread fast. By Tuesday, someone had started a neighborhood Facebook group titled Cedar Pines Residents for Accountability. By Thursday, over 100 people had joined, and then came the audit. The city's Department of Housing Compliance launched a formal investigation. They subpoenaed HOA bank records and found nearly $38,000 in fines collected over the past 18 months, none of it properly documented. And much of it transferred into a private account managed by Helena and her so-called treasurer, a man named Curtis Lyle who, according to his LinkedIn, was a licensed dog groomer and not a CPA as previously claimed. The city froze the HOA's account. Helena and Curtis were both charged with misappropriation of funds and impersonating public officials. That's when the criminal side really kicked in. The trial date was set for April. Lydia pushed for a combined civil and criminal hearing to streamline the process. Helena's attorney tried to argue that the driveway incident was a personal misunderstanding, but the security footage, time-stamped and crystal clear, left little room for interpretation. The judge, an older man with a dry sense of humor and no patience for nonsense, watched the footage twice. "Let me be sure I understand," he said slowly. "You parked in front of Mr. Bell's driveway, knowingly blocking him from attending the burial of his father, because you believed it would compel him to comply with an illegitimate parking policy enforced by a board with no legally elected members." Helena shifted in her seat. "I believed my actions were in the best interest of the community." The judge held up the violation notice she'd taped to my door. $2,300 for emergency lawn damage caused by your illegal obstruction. This is extortion, Mrs. Grimshaw. "And it's going to cost you," he ruled in our favor. The court ordered Helena and the now dissolved HOA to pay a combined $50,000 in damages, $25,000 directly to me for obstruction, emotional distress, and unlawful fines, and another $25,000 split among the co-plaintiffs. The city dissolved the Cedar Pines HOA entirely, placing governance under temporary municipal oversight until a new, properly elected board could be established. The last time I saw Helena Grimshaw, she was standing at the foot of her driveway, watching as contractors removed the unauthorized HOA enforcement zone signs she'd installed at every entrance to the neighborhood. She didn't say anything, neither did I. I just walked past her, clipboard in hand, collecting signatures for the new board election. The new board election was held on a windy Saturday under a rented tent in the park next to the tennis courts. Folding tables overflowed with clipboards, ballots, and fresh donuts someone's niece had baked. The neighborhood turnout was higher than anyone expected. Well over 2/3 of Cedar Pines residents showed up. For the first time in years, people actually wanted to be involved, not just complain. I didn't run for a position. I'd had enough of power games. But I did nominate Mr. Alvarez, a retired transit supervisor who'd spent decades coordinating city-wide infrastructure audits. His speech was 3 minutes long and ended with, "No more secret fines, no more fake rules. You elect me, I'll make sure every line item's in plain English." He won unanimously. By the following week, the city liaison had officially handed over authority to the newly formed board. They held their first meeting in the open-air pavilion next to the lake. No more locked clubhouses. No more surprise agendas. Everything was recorded, uploaded, and translated into Spanish and Korean for the folks on the west end of the neighborhood. But what happened next didn't come from the board. It came from the police. I was in the middle of replacing the rotted fence panel along my backyard when 2 unmarked cruisers rolled quietly down the street. One pulled into Helena's driveway, the other parked at the curb. 3 detectives stepped out, followed by a uniformed officer carrying a padded evidence kit. From my spot near the fence line, I saw the lead detective knock twice. Helena answered the door in a soft blue robe, her hair undone for once. She looked older than I remembered, like the months since the trial had drained something vital from her. The detective showed her a paper, probably a warrant, and she barely reacted. They stepped inside. I wiped my hands on my jeans and watched for a while longer. 20 minutes later, they emerged with 3 sealed boxes, a laptop, and 2 black file folders. Helena followed them out slowly, her expression unreadable. She wasn't in handcuffs, not yet. Later that evening, Officer Kendra Doyle, one of the few local cops who actually lived in Cedar Pines, stopped by my place. She leaned against the railing of my porch like she was trying to decide how much to say. "You saw the cars," she said. "Figured you'd be curious." "I'm always curious when search warrants go out," I said, "especially at that house." She nodded toward the street. Turns out the HOA fines weren't the big story. I didn't say anything. There's evidence Helena and Curtis were using the HOA's PayPal account to launder money, not just fines. Community project funds, vendor payments, insurance reimbursements, most of it rerouted to shell companies. One of them was registered in Nevada under the name Cedar Pines Restoration Initiative. I frowned. We didn't have a restoration initiative. Exactly, but the account received nearly $70,000 over 2 years. The paper trail was sloppy, but enough of the transfers looped through personal accounts that we can trace intent. If charges stick, it's felony fraud and wire transfer violations. I exhaled slowly. You think she'll serve time? Kendra looked toward the trees. Depends on the judge. But Curtis already flipped. Said Helena masterminded the setup once she realized nobody was auditing the books. She figured as long as she stuck to fines and fees, nobody would dig. She was wrong. She was arrogant, Kendra said flatly. And that's the part that always gets them. The indictment came a week later. The DA charged Helena with 3 counts of felony fraud, 1 count of wire fraud, and 2 counts of falsifying public documents. Her bail hearing was short. No community ties, no job, no income since the board dissolved. She was remanded to county pending trial. The news hit the local paper like a dropped anvil. Headlines ran with photos of Helena in court, lips pressed tight, eyes cast downward. The story spread beyond our suburb. A local news station did a short segment on suburban power and the price of fake authority. It featured interviews with 2 of the plaintiffs from our civil suit, including the retired vet whose flag she once tried to regulate. He wore his old Navy cap and stared straight into the camera. She thought the rules were hers to write, he said. Now she'll have to learn someone else's. The new board took swift action. Every previous fine from the last board was reviewed and in most cases reversed. The lien on the single mom's house was lifted. The elderly couple got a handwritten apology from Mr. Alvarez and a reimbursement check. A new policy was introduced: no fines without photographic evidence, a 3-day grace period, and at least 2 board votes. The neighborhood felt lighter. People started talking to each other again. Kids played in the cul-de-sac without parents snapping at them to stay off the sidewalks. Someone organized a weekend movie night and projected The Princess Bride onto the side of the old clubhouse. I brought chairs. It wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it was better. And then, about a month after Helena's arrest, I got a letter, not an email. A real letter. Handwritten, folded in thirds, addressed to me in careful cursive. Inside was a single page. Quentin, you'll be glad to know I've pled not guilty. My lawyer says the case is overblown and the media has made a circus of my name. But regardless of what happens, I want you to know I regret how I handled things that day. I should not have blocked your driveway. I should not have escalated the situation. It wasn't about your father. I hope you know that. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it. Helena Grimshaw, I read it twice. It didn't change anything. But I folded it back up and tucked it into the back of my filing cabinet, somewhere between the HOA's old fake bylaws and the court ruling that dismantled them. The trial was scheduled for the fall. I'd been told I might be called to testify. I was ready if that time came. But until then, I had a fence to finish, a garden to replant, and a neighborhood that finally felt like home again. And this time, no one was going to block my driveway. It was a quiet Wednesday when the prosecutor's office called. I had just finished repairing the side gate, something I'd put off during the chaos, and was rinsing off my hands when the phone rang. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Assistant District Attorney Marla Kerrigan. Her voice was crisp, confident, the kind of tone that told you she didn't waste time explaining things twice. I'll be handling the case against Helena Grimshaw, she said. You've been listed as a primary witness. I leaned against the edge of the porch railing, towel slung over my shoulder. I figured that was coming. What do you need from me? We'll need your full testimony on the driveway obstruction, the illegal fine, and anything you witnessed during the HOA's operation that indicated fraudulent intent. Do you want written statements or in-person interviews? Both. And something else, she continued. We believe Helena was working with additional individuals outside the HOA vendors, possibly a property assessor. We're following the money trail now. If you come across anything unusual in your remaining HOA documents, let us know immediately. I agreed, hung up, and went straight to the attic. My dad was a meticulous man. Before he passed, he'd boxed up every piece of correspondence he'd ever received from the HOA dating back almost 20 years. I hadn't touched the boxes since I moved back in, but now I climbed the stairs, flipped the light on, and dug through them like a man looking for gold. What I found wasn't gold, it was a paper trail. There were contracts unsigned but itemized between the HOA and a landscaping company called Pinecrest Solutions. The letterhead looked official enough, but when I ran the name through the state business registry, it didn't exist. No license. No tax ID. No filings. I cross-referenced the bank statements from the civil suit discovery. Pinecrest Solutions had received over $13,000 in beautification reimbursements over 2 years, and every check was signed by Helena or Curtis. I took photos, labeled everything, and drove straight to the Ada office. Marla looked through the documents with a sharp eye. "You realize this gives us conspiracy to commit fraud on top of the existing charges. Will that help keep her inside?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. She just picked up the phone and requested a forensic accountant, then looked at me with a nod that said, "Keep digging." Back in Cedar Pines, things had settled into a strange kind of normal. The new board was up and running, neighbors greeted each other with actual warmth, and the clubhouse was being used for things like birthday parties and chess nights instead of finger-pointing tribunals. But I kept my head down. I didn't want to become the neighborhood's unofficial crusader forever. I wanted my life back. I wanted to finish the repairs on my dad's study. I wanted to read a book without thinking about bylaws or court filings. Then one afternoon, I got a knock at my door. It was the mail carrier. She handed me a thick envelope with the state seal on it. Inside was a subpoena. Helena's defense had listed me as a hostile witness. At the preliminary hearing, the courtroom was cooler than I expected. It smelled faintly of varnish and old carpet. Helena sat at the defense table in a navy blazer, hair straightened, face unreadable. Her attorney, a man with a reputation for defending white-collar criminals, whispered something into her ear as I took the stand. Marla stood and addressed the judge. "We'd like to begin with the driveway obstruction incident, Your Honor. It's central to the pattern of abuse and retaliation carried out by the defendant." The judge gestured for me to proceed. I told them what happened. Every detail. From the moment I stepped outside in my suit, to the sound of Helena's voice across the lawn, to the way my car had to tear up the grass just to reach the funeral. Her lawyer tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, we contest the emotional impact being dramatized by the witness overruled," the judge replied without looking up. Then came the evidence. Security footage. The time-stamped violation notice. The forged Pinecrest Solutions invoices. And finally, the ledger from the HOA's account showing the payments. Helena didn't look at me once. Marla's closing argument was brutal. "This isn't just about a driveway," she said, walking slowly before the jury. "It's about a woman who weaponized a position she was never elected to. Who used the illusion of authority to steal from her neighbors. Who leveraged grief, fear, and confusion to enrich herself. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a scheme. And the law doesn't allow people to hide behind clipboards and titles they never earned." The verdict came down after just 3 hours, guilty on all counts, 6 counts of fraud, 1 count of obstruction, 1 count of conspiracy, and 2 counts of impersonating a public officer. At sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. "Mrs. Grimshaw," he said, "your actions were not only illegal, they were deeply cruel. You exploited a grieving man, manipulated vulnerable residents, and misled your entire community. You will serve no less than 4 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 30 months. Restitution will be paid from the liquidation of any assets acquired during the period of fraud." Helena's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just sat down as the bailiff stepped behind her and secured the cuffs. And that was it. The fake HOA was gone. The crooked board dismantled. The money returned. Helena was going to prison, and the neighborhood finally had its voice back. At the next community event, they held a barbecue in the park. People brought folding chairs and coolers. Kids ran around with water balloons. Someone brought a karaoke machine. I sat at a picnic table with Lydia, who had driven down from the city to see how it all turned out. "You know," she said between bites of cornbread, "this is the first time I've seen an HOA case lead to actual jail time." I glanced around. Mr. Alvarez was showing off a new community bulletin board. The vet with the navy cap was teaching a teenager how to clean a grill properly. The single mom whose lien had been lifted was laughing with her sister near the bounce house. "It's what she earned," I said. "She used fear to build a little empire. It was time someone burned it down." Lydia raised her soda can. "To the people who fight back." I clinked mine against hers. That night, I walked home past the old clubhouse. It had been repainted soft gray with white trim and now housed a free book exchange by the entrance. I turned down my street, the porch lights coming on one by one, and there in my driveway was my car, unblocked, right where it belonged.